Hello and welcome. I'm Yogendra Yadav and I'm here in conversation with Govind Krishnan, a young author, journalist. I mean, these days I call people who don't have all white hair young, so forgive me.
I would like to think that I'm still young.
All right.
There's a lot of evidence against it.
And author of a wonderful book that I've immensely liked and I've written about. The book is Vivekananda, the Philosopher of Freedom. The book came out recently. I wrote about it in ThePrint. And I got so much feedback. So many people loved it. They said something like, this is so badly needed, wanted more details about the book. And of course, I got a lot of criticism. Very unusual book. He writes, this is fat book, some 485 pages. And the title of the book, the title page itself contains the main thesis of the book, rather provocative thesis, I should think. It says, it's there on the title page, so no ambiguity about it. Vivekananda, the Philosopher of Freedom, and it says, how the Sangh Parivar's greatest icon is its arch nemesis. All right. So that's why I wanted to have a conversation with Govind Krishnan. Welcome to the conversation. Tell me, first of all, before I come to the article, controversies and so on, what attracted you to Vivekananda? Because not many people of your generation who are not converted, are you from a family which is a Vivekananda family or something?
No, not exactly, though. My grandfather was, he was initiated, they used to have this kind of tradition where people who did not take sannyas, they still received spiritual initiation and instruction from monks. So my grandfather received his spiritual instruction from a monk of the Ramakrishna mission who was a direct disciple of Sharada Devi.
Okay.
So there is that connection, but I grew up in a joint family for the first 8 years of my life.
Yeah.
But we were not particularly, there was no particular talk about Vivekananda or any spiritual figure.
And when you grew up, you were not part of any organization of the mission or any political ideology that would take him seriously?
No, not at all. I heard about Vivekananda just like everyone does in their textbooks and,
the Swami with that lovely photograph with that pagadi.
Yeah, with that. And we hear about the Chicago speech.
Yeah.
So I never really attempted to read him because growing up, I used to read fiction, not non-fiction. I was crazy about reading fiction and spent the most of the time with a book in my hand. But around when I was in 11th standard, I started to have, and I became very troubled by some existential questions, which for me were very serious. And like, what is the meaning of life? Does it have any purpose? Or is it just an evanescent nothing? So I had difficulty studying, I couldn't concentrate. This started to fill my entire mind. And of course, I found my way out of it. But this was not the kind of thing that anyone could help me with, whether they're parents or teachers, mentors. But these questions remained in my mind. And then one of my uncles had left the complete works of Swami Vivekananda in that cheap paperback edition that the Ramakrishna mission brings out in my ancestral house. And I just picked it up at the first volume and started reading. And I was enchanted because Vivekananda writes in such breathtakingly simple prose.
Absolutely simple, beautiful, powerful, evocative. Yeah.
And he was trying to answer some of these very questions I was asking. Of course, the answers he provided were not easy or comfortable answers. I don't think any religious thinker is.
That's
but nonetheless, it presented a vision of reality that for me then was completely new, things that I had never thought possible.
Okay, so there is a genuine spiritual root to that. I'm interested that you mentioned Ramakrishna mission because what excites me is the fact that for all these last few years, when so-called Hindu institutions, one after another, have surrendered and have become part of this political project, Ramakrishna Mission has maintained its identity. Even when Prime Minister went there, they gave a very straightforward statement, you know. So the mission has kept its identity, has kept to Vivekananda's philosophy, and not become one more you know, tail to the political project of BJP, RSS, Sangh Parivar.
That is true.
You know,
and there is a lot of wisdom there in the idea that the Ramakrishna Mission had, that we are ascetics, we have renounced the world, and we will not get involved in politics. And this, they took this so seriously that if you remember, Sister Nivedita was involved, who is of course
in the freedom struggle. Yeah.
Yes. They were very close, and there was no animosity, but they still asked her to publicly declare that she was not officially associated with the Ramakrishna Mission.
All right. So from politics to, I mean, distance from politics to direct political reading, because your book in a way is a political reading of Swami Vivekananda. At least it's a counter to one kind of political reading, because over the years, the impression that has gained ground is that Swami Vivekananda, the proud Hindu, is the icon, is the masthead, is the flag for the Sangh Parivar, and they love him. They quote him everywhere, his photographs adorn anywhere, and so there is a kind of an association between the Sangh Parivar and Swami Vivekananda. And that's what you question. In a sense, the central thesis of the book, if I may, from your preface, is Vivekananda's thought stands in direct opposition to all the fundamental tenets of Hindutva, not Hinduism, Hindutva, to its parochial concept of Hinduism, to its insular nationalism and cultural conservatism, its authoritarian collectivism and anti-intellectualism. So all this that you associate with Sangh Parivar's politics, you believe Swami Vivekananda is the antithesis to all this. I of course loved it, I wrote about it, and I got so much flack on social media, because you know, people came and said, this is misinterpretation, you secular people never understand Vivekananda, you are actually anti-Vivekananda. I mean, your book is in praise of Vivekananda. My article was in praise of your book and of Vivekananda, and I was accused of being anti-Vivekananda. These people never understand him. And so much so that, you know, one author, Hindol Sen Gupta, he invited me for a public debate.
Yes, I remember that.
I said the person you should debate is Govind Krishnan. And so what happened? Because I believe you, because one of the television channels approached me. I think Barkha, they approached me. And I said to them that they asked me for your number. I passed on. You said that you agreed. Then what happened?
So they got it. One of the producers got in touch with me and asked me if I can debate Hindol. And I said, sure, I mean, because I knew Barkha is a fair anchor and it will not be one of those, shouting matches. I said, I'm fine. But then what happened is that apparently, initially after agreeing to the debate, then Hindol insisted that there should be a town hall kind of program.
Ah, so he wanted you to arrange some audience for him.
Not me, but for
producers.
And they said that's not possible.
That's not their show format.
That's not their show format. And what the producer told me is that he did not respond after that.
All right, because on this, I mean that puts paid to it. I think because there was this thing of you've run away from debate, and I thought you told me that no, I'm ready for the debate and so on.
Yeah. I mean,
anyway, we'll not spend too much time on these things that really aren't worth it. Let's get to the meat and substance of it. For an ordinary believing Hindu in this country, Swami Vivekananda is someone they all take pride in, and with good reasons. And there is this mental association that he is, in a sense, what the BJP is propagating today are his ideas. You believe that's absolutely wrong. Why?
So, what has happened with Vivekananda is, I think, something that happens with every figure a very celebrated figure over a long period, if there is a lack of a critical intellectual tradition that keeps the figure alive in public memory by examining their thought from the point of view of the questions that occupy us today, the intellectual questions, the cultural anxieties, how does that thinker's thought speak to us? And I think in the last perhaps 3 or 4 decades, the literature on Vivekananda has failed to do that. There are some notable exceptions, but by and large this has happened. So that Vivekananda has become like a mantra, like mantra, after you hear it for a number of times, you just hear the sound. The signification of the words is lost. In the same way, people say Vivekananda, an image comes in their mind, they vaguely associate it with, all these things that the Sangh Parivar talks about, and there it ends. And one big reason is that no one seems to be reading Vivekananda anymore. I mean, we celebrate him so much, but who reads him? We only get this, picked out, curated quotes which are either of a patriotic bent or saying something good about Hinduism, but no one seems to be reading him. And as I said, people who read him should be producing books that introduce the public to Vivekananda's ideas.
Absolutely, this is exactly what's happening to so many of them.
Yeah.
Bhagat Singh, everyone loves Bhagat Singh, everyone has a photo, especially with that hat and all. I don't quite like that photograph, but it's there. And some weird quote about revolution and so on. So I mean, the funny thing is that the RSS uses Bhagat Singh these days. I mean, Bhagat Singh was a communist. He was an atheist, had written a book to say why he is an atheist. Yes. I may agree with him, I may not agree with him. But for heaven's sake, I mean, what has RSS got to do with him? But, they're using him. And in fact, the Sangh Parivar has, because they don't have really any icon from the freedom struggle. Right. So they're gradually encroaching Sardar Patel, Subhash Bose. Nowadays they're talking about Ramanohar Lohia. And the important thing is exactly what you say. Because no one reads them, it's easy to appropriate. No one reads what Sardar Patel actually had to say about RSS. What Subhash Chandra Bose actually did when he was the INA chief. Right. Or what Ramanohar Lohia says about Hinduism. They don't read these things, so they get appropriated.
In fact, about Subhash Bose, it brings me to mind that Vivekananda influenced the national movement quite a lot. So we have figures as varied as Nehru, Bose and Gandhi talking about his influence. And Bose says a very interesting thing, which is that it is the gospel of Ramakrishna Vivekananda that makes the freedom movement possible. Because without the idea that India is not for any one religion, but for all religions, and that all religions are essentially the same, we could not build a freedom movement. And these ideas, like Vivekananda is a champion of the equality of all religions. I mean, he did not merely say, let's tolerate other religions. He said, we accept them. We accept that every religion has this essential truth. That truth is one, is expressed in various ways. And he quotes the Shiva Mahima Stotram to say that, that like various rivers flow into the sea, various spiritual paths and dharmas flow into me. That is the first thing, that you are taken.
And that is the most enchanting part of his Chicago speech. He begins by saying, people remember Chicago speech, but they don't actually remember what he said there.
Yes, he says, and what he is proud of most about Hinduism is that it has sheltered people from other religions. He talks about the Jews who fled and were given sanctuary in today's Kerala. He talks about Christians who, at the time of probably St. Thomas, again who came to Kerala and they settled down there and they grew prosperous. And this accepting attitude was what he was most proud of. He used to say that Hindus build temples for Christians and churches, churches for Christians and mosques for Muslims. And the very idea, I think, that you should demolish a place of worship and replace it with a Hindu one, I think would be deeply abhorrent to him.
Yeah.
But to come back to that question you asked precisely, that I think there are 4 elements in which, there are many elements, but 4 key elements in which Vivekananda is the exact opposite of the Sangh Parivar.
Yeah, which is?
First is his attitude towards Muslims, Christians and other minorities.
Yeah, I'll come to that specifically. You can just mention it.
Yeah.
Specific, because there are a lot of people have asked questions on that. Yeah.
And the other is his interpretation of Hinduism, which stands in very specific matters, is just the opposite of the Sangh Parivar.
How exactly?
It's can I just finish the other 2 points?
Sure.
The third is that Vivekananda was an utter individualist, a complete individualist, to the extent that some earlier writers thought he was an anarchist. He wasn't, but well, the Sangh Parivar, this is apparent if you read Golwalkar or Deen Dayal Upadhyay or Savarkar. They believe in a kind of social collectivity, where the individual, whether it's the nation or the race, has to kind of completely blend into the demands of that. Vivekananda, on the other hand, was for the utter complete freedom of the individual to pursue his or her potentialities in every way. And the fourth one is their attitude towards the West. Now, the West is the bugbear that all the conservative efforts of the Sangh Parivar is aimed at. They fear the West, but secretly envy its success.
The intimate enemy, as Ashish Nandi would call it.
Vivekananda, on the other hand, he criticized the West, yes, but he also criticized the East. His criticism of the West was a kind of, you could say, a proto-imperialist critique, where he's talking about the power they have accumulated, the single-minded pursuit of wealth and all that. But he admired the West a lot. He thought India had as much to learn from the West as to give to her. And I mean,
so in many ways it's like Tagore.
Like Tagore.
In this respect.
Yes, but the only difference is Vivekananda put things very powerfully and evocative, and the way he talks about the West at some points is as lyrical, as lofty in its flights as when he talks about Hinduism, for example.
Yeah, I remember the quote in your book about when Vivekananda is talking about the condition of women in the US.
Yeah.
And how impressed he is with the social confidence, freedom that women enjoy, and how much he would like Indians to learn from that.
In fact, he says this again and again, that social liberty is something that the West has achieved, and something that Indian society does not have and should learn from them. In fact, he asks this question to one of his disciples. He writes a letter where he asks, is it possible to build an Indian society with Western forms of social organization, yet with the religious culture of the Hindus, be a Hindu to the backbone? And he said, I believe it's possible and it must be. So he says not only the West, he wanted India to learn, we should sit at the feet of any country and learn what they have to give. Sure. And we have to give something back. And that's where he talks about the spiritual wealth of the country, which he did not identify only with Hinduism, though Hinduism was a major part of that, but he was very aware that the Sufi tradition, the purse of the Sufi saints, and how Islam developed its own mystical tradition. This is what he thought we had to give, but it's a very far cry from this chest-thumping triumphalism where we think the whole world is just waiting for the wisdom to come out of India. What he said was that we have to contribute our bit. This is our role. Yeah. But he did not think that...
Not the Vishwa Guru type, self-declaring Vishwa Guru.
In fact, he actually tells people, you are learning so many things from the West. Are we to always learn? Shouldn't we give something back?
Yeah.
And this is something that we can give back.
So he's Hindu, he is a proud Hindu, but he's not a Hindu supremacist. And that is what distinguishes him from the RSS, BJP sort of version of Hindutva.
Definitely, he is not at all a Hindu supremacist. And you must also remember that the things that he says, like the same, that all religions are true, may not sound so radical to us. But at that particular point of time, it was, and that is probably why he was received so well at the Chicago. This is that he had no hesitation in saying this in absolute terms. Yeah. And he would, so at that time, it was a very radical position to take. Very few, even the most a pluralist of religious teachers could not make that complete commitment, because they were still stuck within a theological mode of thinking. Well, Vivekananda was not concerned with theology. He was only interested in spiritual experiences and how to have them.
But does he not make one special claim for Hinduism, which is that Vedanta has discovered that ultimate truth? So is that not putting Hinduism in a special position?
Even if that were the case, I would think that would still make him the most tolerant of all the religious preachers that were there. And even now, can we think of a religious preacher who doesn't say there is something special about his or her religious tradition?
I thought so. I mean, do you believe a religious preacher? I mean, can you accuse a religious preacher of having special love for his religion? Yeah, I mean, the point is he's not saying others are bad. He's not saying I'm superior to everyone else. Of course, he has something special. Anyone who preaches Islam, you would expect them to believe that there is something very, very special about Islam that doesn't make him a hater of everyone else. That brings me to the question that I had postponed earlier, which is Christians and Muslims. So so when I put this out in public, people said, you are suppressing the fact of Swami Vivekananda has special kind of, they don't use the word hatred, but hatred for Christians, Christian missionaries. And Hindol Sengupta reminded me of that incident where Swami Vivekananda almost tries to throw someone from the ship, a Christian missionary who was trying to say, trying to run down Hinduism. But what is Swami Vivekananda's relationship to Christianity?
With Christianity, Vivekananda had a very special relationship, because it was not merely a religion he admired, but it played a role in his spiritual life. So when he was wandering, so first there is the fact that Sri Ramakrishna himself practiced Christianity for a while, and he said he had the vision of Jesus Christ and the ultimate spiritual experience that he had when he was practicing Hinduism. This is why even today we go to Sri Ramakrishna mission, you will find a picture of Christ always. And
Swamiji himself carried that book.
Yes, when he was wandering all over India for almost 5 or 6 years with no possessions as an ascetic, he went to Himalayas to Kanyakumari. He only carried 2 books with him. One was the Gita, the other was the Imitation of Christ, a mystical work by a medieval monk. And he also translated this book into Bengali. And published it. This was and
he says that very powerful thing about Jesus Christ, that if I was what is it? Hindi mein I sort of translated it into unka मतलब अपने जिगर के खून से मैं उनके पाँव धोऊंगा, something of that sort. What was that phrase?
It was a woman who asked him probably in America, like, how come you are so passionate about a figure who is not of your own religion? And that's when he says, if I had been alive, and this is a reference to Mary Magdalene washing Jesus' feet with her tears. Had I been alive in Palestine at the time of Jesus of Nazareth, I would have washed his feet with my heart's blood, not
my tears.
Not tears. And this has to be seen in the background to the kind of devotion he had for Ramakrishna as a guru.
But he was very sharply critical of some of the Christian missionaries who were trying to run down Hinduism.
Not really, because if you look at his entire work, you find perhaps 2 or 3, like one thing, he never told the missionaries do not preach. In fact, there is he invited Dr. Barrows, who was himself a Christian preacher, to come to India. He wrote an article praising him and asking people to attend his sermons. He once says to an American audience, we want missionaries of Christ in India. Let the life of Christ be taught in every village and corner of India. But he made a differentiation between, he did not approve of the abuse that a lot of Christian missionaries at that time, mostly British ones, they abused Hinduism vituperatively. And
absolutely.
And this was something, interestingly, there is
and it's in a sense a basic reaction of a nationalist. Colonial power comes and says your religion is nothing, you are nothing, you don't know anything, and a proud nationalist says no, my religion.
Yes, in fact, it's a praise of, but though he was personally attacked, the guru was attacked, we never find him talking in anger about the missionaries. And there are a couple of places where he talk about conversions by Christian missionaries, and he says clearly, this is because you treat these people, because a large number of converts were lower caste. He says, you treat these people with such apathy, of course they are going to convert, and I can't blame them. So, and it was not even a marginal concern for him. So these people, they just pick up one or two anomalous quotes and try to make out as if he was not in the least concerned about Christian missionary activity.
And about Islam?
About Islam, so I don't remember the exact place he delivered this, but I think it was somewhere in South India, where he says, the Mohammedan rule came as a blessing to the downtrodden and the poor of this country. And he says, even to the Mohammedan rule, we owe that great blessing, the destruction of exclusive privilege, that is caste privilege. And he says, it would be madness to think that it was all the work of sword and fire. So first of all, he does not believe that conversions in India happened. So there were forced conversions in the beginning, I think it has been recorded, but that was the majority of conversion in Islam happened, as Vivekananda rightly points out, because so-called lower caste wanted to join a relatively more egalitarian social order, where they had the chance to rise up and they did not face caste oppression. So he repeats this many times. In fact, the thing is, there are points at which he criticizes Islam, but he criticizes all religions, and he praises all religions, because he is not paying lip service to anybody. He is analyzing religions as religions, and there's no political correctness, and at that time it was nothing. So he is,
and he talks about decline of Indian civilization, but for him the decline doesn't begin with the coming of the Islamic rulers. It actually predates that in his thinking, isn't it?
Yes, by 1 or 2 centuries.
1 or 2 centuries.
And he's, in fact, there is this quote where a couple of times he says this categorically. Once he says about his decline, he's like, who is responsible? I keep asking this question, and this answer comes every time. No, not the British. They are not responsible. It is we who are responsible for our misery and degradation. And we alone who are responsible. Our aristocratic ancestors went on treading the common masses of this country underfoot, till under the torment, the poor people almost forgot that they are human beings. For centuries, they have been forced to be just hewers of wood and drawers of water.
Let me ask you one final question, which is, the title of the book is Vivekanand as Philosopher of Freedom.
Right.
In which sense?
So, in every sense, in that Vivekananda defined mukti, which is the traditional aim of most Indian philosophical systems, Hinduism also, as freedom. He stressed, earlier it was thought of as just escape from the cycle of birth and rebirth. But for him, it was freedom from the limitations of finite existence to reach the freedom of infinite existence. That is God or absolute or whatever. But he did not limit it to this. For him, you needed freedom in all aspects of man's being, whether it is political, whether it is social, economic. So that's why he lays so much stress on social liberty and freedom of women.
Absolutely. So here we have Philosopher of Freedom, someone who's not been attended to by the seculars, because we've forgotten someone like him, abandoned by seculars and happily appropriated by the Hindutva family of Sangh Parivar. And what the great service that your book does is to recover him, not merely because he is useful in fighting the BJP, but because he tells us something that we have to learn from. And for me personally, Vivekanand provides a spiritual depth to the spiritually empty politics of secularism. Thank you for this lovely book, which does something remarkable, because it rescues Swami Vivekanand from the neglect of the seculars, who have completely neglected a great figure like him, and from the appropriation by the Sangh Parivar it makes Swami Vivekananda available for the project of reclaiming our republic, not because he is useful, he is a good instrument to beat the BJP, RSS, no, because he tells us something. There's something deeper to learn from his philosophy of Vedanta that you emphasize very much. Swami Vivekananda is not merely an instrument. We need to learn from him, and for me the most important thing is Swami Vivekananda provides a spiritual depth to the vacuous politics of secularism. Thank you.